can sound I see. All right. Anyway, welcome to News. It's good to be here. It's good to see everybody. It's good to be able to breathe. Right. That misemanji was just, it was just stuck there, and I think this is like one of the few times in my life where I was thankful for wind. Right, to move the misemanji. But regardless, that's our current situation in this nation. In other news, I started my other ministry, so I preached in Korean last Friday. I don't know how I gotta do this every week, but yeah, please pray for me. All right, with that, we're continuing the book of James. We're almost done, so we'll be finishing up James soon, and we'll be moving on to the book of Malachi. Yes. Let's go into this today. So the question I want to ask you today is, last week we also talked about money, which is what James is really stressing on, but how do you generally acquire wealth, right? How do people get rich? Huh? Real estate? Okay, so actually land is very valuable these days. It wasn't before, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people bought up a lot of land, and then it was all of a sudden it just keeps skyrocketing because there's more and more people, there's land. My dad always tells me the story about how before he came to America, he actually had an opportunity to buy a bunch of land in Jeju. This is back when Jeju was like shibor, like nobody went there. And then he always says, like, if I had bought that land, we would be like multi-millionaires, blah, blah, whatever. Anyway, so how else does one acquire wealth? Saving? Okay, that's a very Asian mentality. Save for a rainy day, right? I think it's like a Chinese proverb. But okay, saving. If you don't spend money, then I guess you slowly accumulate money. Anything else? Working. Okay, so you have to work to actually make this money, right? Anything else? Stocks, investing, right? Huh? Lottery. So here's another story. My dad was a huge lottery. Like he was addicted. So he would come home and there would be lottery tickets like falling out of his pants every day, and then he actually did win a couple times. But it was like a very a small amount, like maybe like $100 or a couple $100. So he'd be all happy, he'd buy his pizza, and then I would think about, I was like, Appa, I think you lost money with all those tickets you bought. Anything else? Okay, so you guys, no one talked about like being born into wealth, right? Lottery was one. But generally speaking, I think one of the things that the passage we'll kind of talk about today is a lot of times to pursue or to accumulate large amounts of wealth, it requires compromise. It requires, to an extent, immorality to actually gain at the expense of another. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So let's go ahead to the text, James 5. We're going to do verses 1 to 6. James 5, 1 to 6. Open your Bibles, smartphones, or look at the screen. James 5, starting from verse 1, where the Lord says this. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Kind of a very downer passage today, by the way. We're continuing our theme this year of Holiness 2019, and our understanding that God is holy, but in that same way, we are called to be holy like Him. So our hope is to understand a little bit more about what it means to live a holy life this year. We've been going through the book of James, and we've been seeing a lot of these very similar themes, focusing on being blessed through your trials, through your perseverance, on having a genuine faith, and not only listening to the word, but acting upon it, that there would be good deeds and actions based upon what you believe. We spent a long time talking about the power of the tongue, how this one small thing in your body contains so much power, and how easily it could be misused. And then we saw that in the midst of that we are meant to seek heavenly wisdom instead of godly wisdom, to know how to use the tongue in the proper way, and to know that our own pride and selfishness is what causes a lot of the conflicts within among us. And so lastly, we talked about, again, money. And so actually, James had started with 2 warnings, and he started in our last passage from the middle of chapter 4, or the end of chapter 4, where he cautioned people about using or using our money in a way of independence, of deciding God has given me these things, but I'm going to plan independently from Him, and to not seek upon Him, and to not desire to bless others with the things that God has given us. Right? So last week was a lot about the attitude that we're meant to have toward not only wealth, but any times God gives us anything in abundance. But this week, this is just a straight up, it's a straight up condemnation. And really, again, James starts with this opening little phrase of now listen. Now this is what he started last week with, now listen. Normally when he's speaking to Christians, he says, my brothers and sisters. But now he's saying, now listen. So he's talking to people that he thinks are doing things wrongly. And here, last week we talked about how he was talking to merchants and businessmen. This time he's talking about people who have such wealth that they own land, right? They're landlords, and they're using this wealth, they're using this property in kind of oppressive way. And so the question that a lot of people ask when they read this passage, especially scholars, is James writing this to believers? Or is he writing it to people that are outside of the church? Because in the last passage, in the end of chapter 4, it was clear that he was still speaking to believers, and he was encouraging them to have the proper attitude and perspective, knowing that they're just a vanishing mist before God. But now he's just straight up condemning. And this is a passage that if you look at the Old Testament, this is like those prophets condemning people who have done horrible, horrible things. And so a lot of people believe that James can't be writing to believers. He must be writing to people outside of the church. Regardless, what James is saying, he's saying with a lot of anger and strength. And so I want us to take to notion the things that he's speaking against, and in many ways what he's also encouraging us when we experience these things on the other side. So he starts out right away and he says, weep and wail, right? Weep and wail. This is not just crying. This is crying in deep sorrow, crying in deep remorse. Wailing, this is something you do when someone dear to you has passed away. Something that you wish could be taken back. This is the kind of regret that he's saying that these people who are misusing their wealth should react when they understand who God is. Weep and wail. And so then he says, your wealth has rotted, right? Your wealth has rotted. Actually, the word that he uses for rot is actually the same exact word for poison that he used for the tongue. It's, what is it, like yos, something like that. It's a homonym. Basically, it's the exact same word with different meanings. But in chapter 3, James has called the tongue a poisonous tongue. And he talked about how this tongue, when it's misused, could do all such horrible, terrible things. And in the same way, he's saying the same thing about wealth. That wealth, as it's rotted, is something that destroys. It's something that devastates. But it's not so much about the wealth itself, and I'll get to that in a second. So here's the funny thing. Silver and gold actually don't corrode. He says your silver and gold, their corrosion testifies against you, but that's actually impossible. For those of you that know anything about like noble metals and chemistry, I'm wearing a gold ring right now. If this corroded, I would be in trouble because I've worn this in the shower. I've done all sorts of things. Gold doesn't corrode. That's why it's precious, because it lasts virtually forever. Silver, on the other hand, is almost similar. It tarnishes, like it gets a little bit darker. But in general, silver and gold do not corrode. That's the irony of what he's just said. That's the reason why they're so precious and valuable, is not only are they shiny, but they last forever. That's why we make, wedding rings and rings of metal that will last. And, you know, if you've gone to weddings and people will talk about the ring, like, oh, the ring made of precious metals that will last forever, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's the reason why these things are precious to us. And so, here's the irony. They don't actually corrode. So what does it mean when James is saying your silver and gold have corroded? Right? They've rusted away. The word rusted that he uses, to completely rust. Now, I'm going to quote from Jesus a lot because, James is a little brother of Jesus. So he's often saying things that were influenced by the words of his big brother. So Matthew 6, Jesus says in verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So here Jesus was reminding us that these treasures on earth are temporary, right? We can't take them with us. Ultimately, they will be destroyed. They will be consumed. They can be taken away. But treasures in heaven last forever. That's what Jesus was encouraging us to understand. And he continues by saying, James talks about hoarded wealth. And so basically what James is really telling us is that, well, here's the problem with wealth. You're never happy with how much you have, right? I remember when I was young, we used to think $1 million was a lot of money. We're like, if I made $1 million, I can retire, I can live like, a nice, happy life. $1 million is nothing right now, seriously. Like, yeah, you will live okay for a period of time, but you cannot retire on $1 million today. You just can't. That's the reality of money, is that wealth, no matter how much you think is enough, will actually never be enough. You're always not satisfied with what you have, right? You're always seeking to gain more. And so James is telling us, this hoarded wealth, it is rusted through. It is completely worthless. Right? When you look at rust, if you just get a little bit, you can actually restore something. Right? You can take the rust off, you can restore it. But when something completely rusts through, it gets brittle and it just crumbles away. Right? And look at that poor locomotive. Right? Like rust, it just destroys. And something that looked formidable, something that looked impenetrable, can just fall apart, right? That was one of the issues for the Titanic, if I'm correct. It corroded. Very poor engineering, by the way. But anyway, so this is what we're being told, is that wealth, when we accumulate it, this is what it ends up being. Worthless. Worthless. Now, in many ways, there are always fables about this, right? What are some fables about wealth that teach us about how worthless it can be? You guys know at least a couple of these. Come on. Christmas time. This one always comes out. Scrooge, right? Christmas Carol, right? Ebenezer Scrooge. He completely, he gives up all of his happiness in his pursuit for wealth. Right? Now, of course, I'm from the age where we watch DuckTales a lot, so I'm I think of Scrooge McDuck instead of Ebenezer Scrooge, so it kind of messes me up. Well, what else? There's a Greek story. What's the Greek story about wealth? King Midas, right? The Midas touch. There was a king who desired, he helped some guy, and this guy was going to grant him his wish, and so he desired that anything he touches would turn to gold. And at first he's all like, yeah, it's great. He's like touching roses and like touching like plants, like things that aren't of much value. And he's just amazed that it's turning to gold. And then all of a sudden he tries to eat food. And it turns to gold in his mouth, right? He can't drink water. He can't eat. He's like, I'm starving. And then in another version of the story, he actually touches his daughter, right? Because his daughter's crying about the roses. And he's like, oh, it's okay. And then he turns into gold. Like, what? And so, that's a story. Like, I think like the way it ends is he has to go and wash, put his hand in a river, and like it takes away his power or something like that. But regardless, these stories are meant to tell us that wealth ultimately doesn't satisfy. If anything, it creates more problems. I'm dating myself again, but there was like a show called Living Color. They'd be like, more money, more problems, right? Like, very few people got that. I'm sorry. that was late, Eugene. I was expecting you earlier. But regardless, that this is one of the things that we know, but at the same time, when it comes realistically to how we actually live our lives, we don't actually live it as if we know this truth. So many times when it comes down to the choices that we make, we don't actually choose what we know to be true according to what God desires us to do. Now here's the thing, wealth in itself is not an evil thing, right? Just like the tongue by itself is not necessarily an evil thing. So what is evil if it's not the wealth, if it's not the money? 1 Timothy 6, Paul writes from verse 9, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. For some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So here Paul is saying, it's not money itself, it's the love of money. The love of money, which is the root of all evil. Now, Jesus continues in Matthew 6. I already quoted earlier in this passage, but later on Jesus says from verse 24, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It's when we love money, when we value it so much that we're actually putting it above God, that is the problem. Now, let me just be real. Unfortunately, we live in an age, we live in a society where money carries a lot of weight. And now, this has always been true, but I can say specifically my experiences from living in the States and living here, Korea is a very cash-driven society, right? Just to get an apartment, you need like thousands, tens of thousands of dollars just to put a deposit down. That's not true in America. America, you can rent a place with just a 1-month deposit. So it's like, $1,000 or something like that. And then you're paying more rent, but you don't have to carry these large, basically these large bags of money. But Korea has always remained a very cash-driven society. So much so that accumulating this amount of money is actually holding a lot of people back from doing things. I've met people who couldn't get married because they needed enough money for chunse. That's crazy, right? Do you know how much chunse is? We're talking about like metal, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when you look at, and here's the crazy thing is, young people in Korea, they're old when they start working, right? The average age is like 26, male and female combined. So guys are more like closer to 30 by the time they start working. And they're starting these entry-level positions where they're getting paid nothing. Very little. If you were to extrapolate that and think, wow, okay, how much money does this person need to earn to, quote unquote, earn enough for chunse? You're talking about this person will be like 50 years old. And here's the thing is, it's a moving target. Every year that passes, that amount of chunse goes up every year, right? There's inflation, so it's all you're like trying to catch up. And so I don't know, I look at Korea today and I look at young people and I'm like, I don't understand how this works. Because if you don't have family that's helping you, then I don't know how it happens. That's the reality of what we're living in today. So it's a society where money plays a very big role in what you can and cannot do. Now, this idea of serving wealth grew to the point where they actually personified greed. So mammon is considered the personification of greed, the desire for more and more wealth. And so in that passage where it said, you cannot serve both God and money, it's actually originally translated as God and mammon. And so they say mammon is this personification of greed, that you desire this money, and so you're serving this different spirit that is not the Lord. See the little guy, he's like holding on to his money bags. He's a greedy guy. And so the problem with this is to actually accumulate the wealth that these people desire. It often requires compromise. It often requires you to cut corners. It often causes you to mistreat people. Right? Now I know some of you in this room have suffered from this in the sense that you have been mistreated by those that have been above you. You have been misused by those, unfortunately some who even claim to be Christian. And so there are many of you in this room that understand the other side of this. Now there are some of you that are on the side where you might actually become an oppressive landlord. So I'm warning you right now, that brothers and sisters, wealth is not the end goal. Right? Accumulating lots of money will not buy you any happiness or joy. It's all temporary. Now unfortunately, we also live in a society that likes to cut corners. That likes to kind of bend the rules to make more profit, right? You guys remember like Korean history, that all those like the shoddy construction, like people dying because of like these malls that are collapsing on them. That's people cutting corners. That's all that is. So much so that people are still scared whenever they see like a mall and there's like a crack I'm not going in there. But that's the reality, is that many in this nation, in this culture, have chosen to earn more profits by doing immoral things. So here's the issue, is that when we choose to make money our master, we're also choosing to compromise what our faith actually is. We are compromising our morality, we are compromising what we knew to be true and right. Now the passage goes straight into failure to pay wages. The cries of the people that you owed money to are crying out against you. So much so that the Lord Almighty Himself is listening. And He is responding with justice. Deuteronomy 24 from verse 14 says this: do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israelite or a foreigner residing in one of your towns. Pay them their wages each day before sunset, because they are poor and are counting on it. Otherwise they may cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. What was considered fair in the Old Testament was, if you worked you worked an honest day's work, then you got your wages that night, right, before you left. I remember when I first started working. I started working when I was at the age of 14. I don't know if that's legal anymore, but I was at 14, and I was working at a pizzeria, and I was making all of $4.25 per hour back then. But I remember I was excited because I was making my own money, but then I was like, how come I'm not getting paid yet? Like, what's going on? Oh, we pay you like every 2 weeks. I'm like, oh, okay, so I have to wait. And then, like, you get your first paycheck. You guys know this. You get your first paycheck, you're excited, you've calculated how much you're going to get, and you're like, why is this so small? Like, you don't realize how much they take out for tax and all these, like in America, there's like what? Like Medicare, Social Security, all this stuff, and you're like, what is it? I'm making nothing. And so I'm sure many of you have had this experience, but what the Word is saying, what is biblical, is paying people on time, right? Because honestly, if you are not paying someone on time, you are basically taking a zero-interest loan from them for a period of time. That's exactly what you're doing. I know we have someone who's laughing about this because they're going through this right now. But regardless, this is reality. If you are running your business in a way that you are not paying people timely, you are misusing them. You are taking advantage of them. That is biblical. Now, some of you, don't go to your employer and be like, hey, you only pay me monthly, I want you to pay me every day. And that might not work in today's age. But just understand that this is what the Bible teaches, is for those that are employers, treat your people well. Okay? Take care of them. Now, one of the things that has really disappointed me, especially here in Korea, is probably one of the worst places to work for here is an organization that's Christian. I'm just being honest. They often will use God to justify mistreating their own employees. It's like, oh, it's God's will for you to get paid late, or it's God's will for you to work long hours. Like, I'm not going to point fingers, but there are companies I know of that are Christian, quote-unquote Christian publicly, some of which even have like prayer rooms in their companies, and they are no different than any other Korean company. If anything, they tend to mistreat their employers even more, and they justify it by saying it's for the Bible. And a lot of these same companies, ironically, that are Christian, don't want their people to go to church. Because if you go to church, you're not going to work. So, okay, you can go to church on Sunday, you can take like half the day, but we want you back, right? It's that bad. I almost got hired by a university that was kind of doing something like this. It was using the name of church and Christianity, even though the school itself wasn't Christian. And everyone there, they had to lie to say they're Christian to get a job, because people in Korea are so desperate for jobs, they will do that. But they were completely being mistreated day in and day out. And I'm so thankful I didn't take that position, because I don't think I could have lived with seeing people treated that way in the name of Christ. But brothers and sisters, this is often what many of us face on a day-to-day basis. And so what James is saying, these people that are doing this, these oppressive landlords are basically fattening themselves up for the day of slaughter. Now, I want you to understand, back then, they didn't have refrigerators. So if you had a cow and you killed the cow, you had to eat as much meat as you could, because there was no refrigerator for it. You would have to salt the rest of the meat to preserve it, right? And so back then, if you actually had meat, then you would gorge yourself on the meat. And this is how people ate back then. But what James is saying, these people that are eating like this every single day because they are mistreating people, so they are taking advantage of others and making more wealth and are using that wealth to fatten themselves up, they are basically fattening themselves for the day of judgment. That when God comes, He will treat them as they have treated others. Because they have condemned and murdered the innocent. Right? This is basically what James is saying, is by doing the things that you're doing, you might not have directly murdered someone, but you are murdering them day in and day out every time you mistreat them. And their cries are reaching the Lord, and He will bring judgment upon you. And so the reality of why James wrote this is, yes, there were maybe people that needed to hear this, but more often than not, the people in the church were experiencing oppression from people that had wealth. And so the reason why he wrote this passage, or one of the main reasons why, was to tell them, God will be your judge. God will deliver your justice. You are experiencing a lot of oppression right now, and there are so many things that are happening that are just not right. But it's okay, because God will take care of this in the end. So I know there are some of you that have experienced this or may continue to experience. I want you to understand that leave it to God. God will deliver the justice that you desire. Take comfort in that. But at the same time, don't ever become like that. Don't let wealth corrupt and change you. The love of wealth, the desire for more. Instead, brothers and sisters, choose to be above reproach. You can be someone of wealth, you can be someone of influence, and actually do it in a way that is honorable. Right? I truly believe, brothers and sisters, that if there were Christian companies, like Christian CEOs that chose to run their companies in a godly and biblical manner, there would be amazing things that would happen. First of all, I truly believe that God would bless those companies. They would be productive. I also feel that God would also make the people there very content and happy. They would desire, they would enjoy working there. But there would be risks, right? Because when other companies look and they see, okay, those guys work this many hours, we need to work harder, right? But this is the opposite of this. This is saying what? You know, those people work like this, but we are going to work just normal hours. There's no yaga in here. You go home, right? You go home when it's 5 o'clock, you go to your families, you spend time with them. I truly believe if companies are willing to take these risks, God will bless them in this way. And as I've said in the past, that I truly believe that the thing with Korea is when Korea sees change happen, it happens across the board. All of a sudden, one company is doing well and they're treating their people well. Other companies are like, hey, what's going on over there? They look like, oh, they're treating them well. Oh, we should do that too, right? Then all of a sudden, like every single company is going to follow suit. That is the nature of Korea. When change happens, it happens quickly. Unfortunately, people aren't willing to take that risk. But I truly believe that that could happen. But for us here in this room, my encouragement and challenge for you today is to choose to live above reproach. Don't take the shortcuts. If you're a student, cutting hajima, right? Don't cut corners, don't cheat, right? If you are a person in the workforce, don't take credit for other people's work. Right? Be honorable. Do the right thing. And I truly believe God will bless you in that. So brothers and sisters, don't be masters of don't be mastered by your money. Instead, use your wealth in a way that glorifies the Lord. Use the things that God has blessed you with and given to you for His kingdom and for His glory, and you will be blessed so much more. Seek some time to pray, and we'll go ahead and close for today. I want us to take a moment first. If there's anyone here that has felt mistreated, abused, or oppressed by others, that you would just lift it up to God. I pray also that even in your heart right now that you would forgive those that have mistreated you, and that you would just let God be the one who brings justice, that you would just leave it up to Him. So let's take a moment to just pray that for those of us that have been mistreated in the past, that we would forgive those who have done so. Let's pray. Last, brothers and sisters, I just want us to pray that regardless of our situation, whether we're students, whether we're in the workforce, whether we're raising families, that we would choose to live in an honorable way. That we wouldn't cut corners, that we wouldn't bend the rules, but we would live in a way that honors God and encourages and edifies others. Let's pray that we would live like that. Let's pray. thank you and we praise you first and foremost for Jesus Christ, your Son. We thank you that we are back in relationship and in restoration with you because of what he has done for us. And so, Father, help us to have the right heart and attitude, Lord. Not only to seek after your will, Lord, but to live our lives in an honorable way, Lord. That even if we're mistreated, even if we're abused and oppressed by others, that we would know, Lord, that you are the one who brings justice. And that we would forgive those that mistreat us. That we would love those that treat us even as our enemies. And I pray also, Lord, that for us, Lord, that we wouldn't be consumed by the love for money or anything like that. Anything, Lord, that takes away our eyes from you, Lord. We pray against that kind of idolatry. And pray instead, Lord, that the things you give us, whether it's wealth or whether it's other things, or that we would use them in a way that honors you and glorifies your kingdom. So help us, Lord. Help us, Lord, to not be influenced by the world in this way, but to instead influence the world by living our lives in a way that you desire. We thank you, Lord. We praise you in the name of Jesus. Amen.